it is an unsolved mystery with developments coming all the time. But I have to admit, I was a little shocked to learn that Joran Vandersloot and the Cowpoe brothers were rearrested in connection with the death of Natalee Holloway. I didn't realize there was any more evidence that could be found more than 2.5 years after she disappeared. Vandersloot is still being held, but a deadline to release him is fast approaching. Deepak and Satish Cowpoe walked out of custody over the weekend, and I am joined today by Joe Tacopino, the attorney for Joran Vandersloot, who is going back to Aruba this week. Joe and I go back to the Brooklyn District Attorney's office, where we got our start in the law.
That's right.
Okay, so Tac, let's start with this. If I was surprised that they were rearrested, and I'm going to separate your client from the Cowpoe brothers, you had to be surprised also.
It was incredible. I mean, you know, I knew they were still doing another look-see, and they went back to the house in the spring, as you know, and did another search on the Vandersloot property.
And fresh eyes, because you got a new prosecutor.
New prosecutor, new investigators. But, you know, I know that for 2.5 years they looked at this kid every which way, turned every grain of sand on that island upside down, looked at all of his statements, looked at his phone records, his computer records, spoke to witnesses, tried to get something on him because he was the target initially. And when the evidence kept repeatedly turning elsewhere, pointing in other directions, the judge finally let him out of jail after 3 months, 2.5 years ago. I thought it was over. I really thought they'd come to grips with the fact that Joran wasn't responsible for this.
And Joran went back to college and got on with his life.
Right. I mean, he was an honor student in high school, went and was accepted at a prestigious university in the Netherlands, was about to take his first year's final exams, and then this happens, you know, and it's a little disconcerting, it's a little aggravating, and, you know, more importantly, look, if they had new and incriminating evidence, I could understand that this takes precedence over everything else in someone's
Obviously.
life. But there's no new evidence, and there certainly, Star, is no new incriminating evidence, and it's really just an outrage that this kid has been spent 3 months in jail already. Life has been turned upside down. Understanding we want to get to the truth of what happened here.
Right, of course. There's a young girl that's missing and presumed to be dead at this point.
Absolutely, but then to rearrest him. And look, the Cowpoe brothers just got released last week. Don't forget they're about 7 days ahead of Joran in the time schedule here as far as the Aruban law is concerned, because Joran had to be extradited first. But to do that, arrest these kids, put them in jail again, isolate them, not let them see anyone, not let them read anything, just to try and break them, and then release them after 8 days when the judge said there's not enough to hold them. This is the 13th arrest in this case, and it's getting a little old to arrest and release, arrest and release.
It's very interesting because I don't get how the Aruban government works in this regard. I'm not going to make myself an expert, but I understand that there is some sort of deadline approaching the end of the year. What is that deadline, and what does it trigger?
You know, it's a little gray, honestly, to everyone, including the Aruban lawyers who I work with on this case. What we know about that end of the year deadline is that's Hans Moss, that's the chief prosecutor's self-imposed deadline for the time that they are going to present this case to a judge and ask to go to trial, or say that we're dismissing any investigation or case. Don't forget, Joran's not been charged with anything yet.
Right.
He's being held under suspicion of. And they've imposed this deadline. But in Aruba, there is a statute of limitations. I think it's 2 years that you could be deemed a suspect.
Got it. So
Okay.
unlike a homicide case, which you and I both know there is no statute of limitation, at least in this country.
Right.
I'm assuming it's the same thing in Aruba.
It is, but it's a little more complex. It's what they need to do after they finally deem that the statute's run and Joran's no longer a suspect. If they then find new evidence against Joran, doesn't mean they can't go after him for a homicide. What it means is they have to go to a court. A judge has to actually approve that new evidence and open the investigation. It can't be the prosecutor.
So during this investigative period of 2 years, which is where you are now, that's why they could bring him in, rearrest him, send him back, bring him in, rearrest him, send him back.
Well,
but at the end of the year, they either got to do it or get off the pot, as we normally say.
That's right, and I think it's time to get off the pot once and for all. I mean, they said when they rearrested him, look, we had to take everyone at their word, that they had new and incriminating evidence. That's the only reason they could rearrest him. Well, I saw the document filed summarizing this new and incriminating evidence, and I really thought I was missing 3 or 4 pages because there was nothing new and nothing incriminating.
We're not talking any text messages, telephone calls, phone records that suggest, because you know there are so many rumors out there.
It's unbelievable.
That you know, the three men, you know, got together and talked about, well, we'll dispose of the body this place, or let's go and put him in the lobster trap. I mean, there's even rumors about the judge, Johan's father, being involved in the disappearance, or I should say in the disposal of young Natalee's body. You've heard them all. I'm not giving you something that's surprising you.
This case has been larded, Star, with rumors from day one. I mean, we've heard rumors that they had confessed the first week they were in custody. That never came to fruition. We heard that there was a tape that was played on one of the syndicated daytime shows that claimed to have the Calpos confessing, which subsequently turned out to be a spliced and doctored tape. We've heard rumors that there are text messages and cell phone calls from Euron and the Calpo brothers from earlier this year. That's what we heard in this case. That was the new evidence. That's not true. There's absolutely no calls, no new evidence.
Okay, now I know that the defense attorney's job is to protect their client and to scream innocence from the top of their lungs, from the courthouse steps to every place they can. But Joe, you're putting your reputation on the line for this guy for the last 2 years.
Right.
And you really believe that you are defending an innocent man.
There's really, Star, look, I wasn't there that night. I certainly don't have the answers to what happened to Natalee, but I wouldn't be sitting here and every other media outlet that I have respect for, and like you just said, putting my name out there, my reputation online, vigorously defending, not just saying they can't prove their case. There's a big difference.
You and I both know that.
There's a big difference. I could say they can't prove their case and not say anything else and still be vigorously defending the client.
Yes.
But it's different when I'm saying I've seen this kid get run over in the press, especially the first year this happened. I still get emails from people who, you know, I laugh sometimes. I don't get them directly. My secretary brings them to me, and there'll be these people with these, you know, opinions of Euron that he's a sociopath, he's a killer, but no one ever could cite any material evidence as to why that's the case. They just look at him and say, oh, she's missing, so he must be a killer. And we went really through the test of a full-blown investigation. It took me a month and a half before I agreed with Euron and his father to take this case because I wanted to be comfortable. We went down there with a team of investigators, both forensic and street investigators, who spoke to witnesses, reviewed computer records, cell phone records, pieced together. Look, if this case ever were to go to trial, Star, there's no question he'd be acquitted. The stuff that I have, it screams out Euron's innocence. The stuff the prosecution have screams out his innocence. And no, I wouldn't be sitting here repeatedly, especially when they rearrested him. Look, I was in a second, I was behind the plate again, defending him. And people were like, geez, isn't that risky? You don't know what that new evidence is. I said, whatever the new evidence is, I know it's not going to implicate Euron. And I was right.
Is he going to be released sometime this week, or do you think they're going to extend for that extra 60 days that I understand that they can move for?
They're going to try, no question about it. And, you know, you never know which way the wind blows in Aruba. And the justice system we've seen down there is a little bit different. Certainly, if the Calpos were released, he should be released. There's no distinction there. And, you know, I saw the prosecutor say the other day, we're really disappointed this is a big setback because we wanted to confront the suspects with new evidence, the new evidence. Well, what were they waiting for? They had 8 days to confront with the new. Euron's been there for now, it's been almost 2 weeks because, don't forget, he was.
Do they get to interrogate him?
Yeah, all they want. All they want. They get to interrogate him.
So they tried to flip city, I have to imagine. You know, I'm sure they said there's a train leaving the station.
Right. Oh, they said that, though. Don't forget, they said it 2.5 years ago, and that produced the greatest tape in this case for Euron Vandersloot. That's the police car tape that people are confusing, thinking it's a wiretap. But that's the tape where, when Euron was released, it's a very important piece of evidence in this case, though. After they released Euron after 3 months, they pulled him out of the cell. They released the Calpos after 3 months, took him out of the cell, said to Euron, the Calpos just said you did it. Said to the Calpo brothers, Euron just said you did it. Put the three of them in a police car together. Okay, no, they hadn't seen the light of day in 3 months. Put a tape recording, a bug under one of the police seats, and said, boys, we'll be right back, and left. Waiting to hear these great elaborate confessions and
plans
and how could you have told them I did this and that. And all you heard was a screaming match, basically two sets of boys cursing each other out, saying, how can you lie about me, and so on and so forth. But one thing you heard is Euron repeatedly leaving open the possibility that Natalee was still alive in that recording, which was clearly not a planned recording because they were furious at each other. And Euron, one thing that came crystal clear, and the judge cited this in his opinion on why Euron should not be detained again, is that Euron had no idea what happened to Natalee Holloway that night, no idea what happened after he left her, and that's the most powerful piece of innocence in this case.
And you, in closing, I want to be clear. You represent Johan you don't represent the Cowboy brothers, and so their defense may in fact be different than your defense, and your defense is you have an innocent young man here.
Period. End of story. I have no idea what the Cowboys, defense is, whether they have any, tangential involvement or direct involvement. I don't know. I'm not taking that position, and I have one client and one client alone.
Joe, I'll check in with you this week to see what happens when you go down to Aruba. I know you're basically getting on a plane in a couple of days.
Yeah, we're bringing the team. Yeah.
All right, bringing the whole team. I want to thank my friend and colleague, Joe Tacopino. Up next, we will look at the flip side of the case. I'm going to talk with the attorney and private investigator working for the father of Natalee Holloway. I want to know what they know about the rearrest and the new search efforts to recover a body. We'll be right back.
He had the opinion that there is not enough material to keep them on the counts that we think are valid in this case. The judge also said that he thinks that there is serious material against these two suspects pertaining to much lesser forms of crime, such as make a body disappear.
Before the break, we heard from Joe Tacopino, the attorney for Joran Vandersloot, who, as you know, has been rearrested in connection with the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. Now I'd like to bring in two guests who are working on behalf of Natalee's family, specifically his father. TJ Ward is a private investigator who said recently he passed along some information to the Aruban authorities. And on the phone is Vinda D'Souza, Dave Holloway's attorney, who is actually in Aruba. Vinda, we're going to get to you in just a minute. TJ, I'm going to start with you because I know you talked to Dave Holloway.
Yes.
And I spoke with Beth a couple days ago, and they are both being very reserved, as I understand, and not trying to get their hopes up too high, but having hopes that there is new evidence. How is Dave feeling about the direction that things are going in?
Well, I think it's very good that they're not getting their hopes up. Of course, we now have seen 13 arrests and 13 people released. And the Calpo brothers just recently being released is not a real good sign, but I don't believe that the Aruban authorities, much less the Holland authorities, who are now in the course of this investigation, would lead people to believe that there's not new evidence, that there really isn't something there to hang their hat on. In the course of the latter part of 2005, we had developed some information from some Colombians who implicated Paulus Vandersloot of knowing or bringing a boat in.
That's Joran's father. I want the audience to know who we're talking about since we're using
Paulus
names.
Vandersloot, that had brought a boat in, and this was out in the public, and I believe Beth knew something about or heard something about Paulus Vandersloot bringing a body in. And I have turned that information.
A boat. Wait 1 second. You misspoke and said a body, TJ. I want to make sure.
No, a boat. I brought a boat in.
You misspoke by
yes,
mistake.
Brought a boat in to remove Natalee's body off the island of Aruba. This information I turned over to Dave Holloway, who turned it over to the FBI and also to the Holland authorities, and they do have knowledge of this conversation that I had with these individuals. So I believe, and I have all along, that somebody else knows about this, that three boys could not pull off the perfect crime. Ironically, at the beginning of the investigation, if you'll recall, there were two security guards that played a major role in the first 2 weeks of this investigation. The mere fact that the Aruban authorities did not take the evidence into custody that they should have. They didn't get the DNA, they didn't search the house, they never took the car. At the time all this transpired on the 30th of May of 2005. The main concern was the security guards in the Holiday Inn, which I later learned and turned over to the media that Vanderstraten, the lead investigator for the Aruban authorities, was the godfather of Joran Vandersloot.
So in other words, the investigators in the beginning, when is the most crucial time, and I know this from experience, crucial time in the disappearance and the investigation, it basically we're going in the left direction when clearly that left direction had nothing whatsoever to do with the disappearance of Natalee.
That's correct, and the investigators got hampered from the beginning of trained police officers to gather information that they should have at a crime scene at the apparent time on the 30th of May. This didn't transpire. This did not transpire at all. It was, the main focus was on the security guards at the Holiday Inn until such time that they released them and found out that they were not part of the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. And then they picked up the investigation of the last 3 people that were last seen with Natalee leaving Carlos and Charlie.
Which you might have thought would have been the initial people that they go on. Before I let you go, because I know that you're working on this case even as we speak. We've heard about wiretaps. We've heard about new investigations, new eyes being looked at. Does the Holloway family at least feel that they are heading in the right direction to find out what ultimately happened to their child?
I think that the Holland authorities taking over the investigation and reviewing the documentation, which they have to their disposal from Aruba, that they might find something that was there that was overlooked, and I believe they've got something to hang their hat on. And I don't want to get excited about it at the present time, because we've had 13 people arrested, 13 people released. The mere fact that there must be something there, and the course of the information that you can get out of Aruba is very minimal. And unlike then when there's an arrest in the United States that you're able to get copies of the warrants, you get copies of the police reports.
Right.
None of that is the exposure of the public, and much less an investigator or an attorney.
Well, I'm going to actually ask Venda some questions, since Venda is their attorney down there. I tell you one thing, TJ, you have done a yeoman's job in being an investigator and getting this information so that the family can at least have closure. They want to know what happened to their child, and we appreciate the work that you've done.
The most important thing that I could like to hang my hat on is to bring closure to Beth and to Dave Holloway, to know there's nothing worse than losing your child, and for the unknowns and what's going on in Aruba is just unbeknown to me.
I absolutely agree with you on that one. TJ, thank you so much for your help in this, and we will be checking back with you. As I said, I'm going to talk to Venda D'Souza, who is indeed Dave Holloway's Aruban attorney. Venda is on the phone with us right now. Venda, Hans Moss, the prosecutor down there, says that there's new evidence. Do you have any clue what the new evidence is?
Not really. They are not disclosing anything about the new evidence. They don't want anything to hamper their case and to maybe the evidence be thrown out in court if the case is indeed brought to court. But I have understood more or less that there is somehow some kind of technical evidence which would entail maybe wiretaps or emails, anything of that sort.
Well, you know, I just spoke with Joe Tacopino. He says he's taken a look at the so-called new evidence. He doesn't see anything there. I do know that the burden of proof lays on the prosecution, and if you're going to rearrest, the burden is heavier. You can't just bring somebody in and then let them go, and then bring somebody in and let them go. So in theory, they had to go before a judge and say, I'm bringing these people back in. We have something new. But this judge clearly didn't think that the Calpo brothers, it was enough to hold them. Do you think that they're going to hold your end at the end of this week?
You see, I can't speculate on that, but I do absolutely agree with you that the burden is much heavier when you rearrest suspects that have been released from preventive custody before. And a judge did indeed look at it, and in the beginning, it was found enough to hold the Calpo brothers. Now a judge took another look again, but the more you request for an extension, the more you have to present. So maybe this time around the judge didn't think that there was nothing else than there was 10 days ago in order to keep the Calpo brothers.
And I don't think people realize that, you know, we've been talking about this as a possible homicide case, but you can, in theory, be the accomplice but not the responsible person. So
exactly.
For all we know, Venda, the prosecution is not looking at one or more of the suspects to have committed the actual crime. And I'm just assuming there's a crime after 2.5 years. And I think the Holloway family will agree with me. I know Beth does. But that they may have participated in some way in disposing of Natalee's body.
True, I agree. Like you say, you can be an accomplice to a crime, but not actually being the perpetrator. I agree, and they do have, and that case would explain why the judge released the two Kalpo brothers. Like Hans Moss said publicly in his statement, that the judge is looking at the Kalpo brothers as accomplices and not as a perpetrator.
Well, we'll see a little later in the week, because I understand Joran is going back into court and they're going to have to make a decision whether or not they're able to keep him for the additional 60 days or indeed let him go after the 8, such as the Kalpo brothers. But as far as I can tell from all sides, everyone thinks fairly highly of Hans Moss, the new prosecutor, and not just of him, but the investigative team, that at least they are working to get to the bottom of this to provide some closure for all of these families. Would you agree with me, Venda?
Yes, I do agree, but I must point out one thing, though, that the investigation never stopped. It continued all along. What happened is that the limelight was taken away from this case for a while. It was not as much the news as it was in the beginning, but they continued investigating, and the Dutch investigators came in upon request of the Aruban investigators, the Aruban authorities, and the Dutch did not take over. They're simply working in conjunction with.
So it just seems as if everybody is sort of at least moving in one direction,
yes,
and that direction being closure for all of these families. Venda D'Souza, thank you so very much for giving us some information on the Aruban process, something that is foreign to us and foreign to a lot of people. We want to thank you, and of course our prayers go out for the family of Natalee Holloway. It's been far too long for them not to know what happened to their child.